Welcome to My Boy Will Die of Sorrow, a conversation about family separation. I'm Dolores Schrader, Chief Executive Officer of RAICES. RAICES offers free and low-cost legal services, social services, and advocacy support to immigrants and refugees. A recent investigative report by Caitlin Dickerson of The Atlantic magazine showed the federal government implemented a family separation policy intended to be a deterrent, but it was also in fact exploitative of asylum-seeking refugees and immigrants. Here's some highlights of the report. As of January 20th, 2021, the figures were updated showing the minimum number of children that were separated from their parents was 5,569 children. It was uncovered that there was no tracking mechanism put in place to ultimately ensure that families would be reunified. To date, at least 360 parents have been reunited with their children, and 700 families still have not been reunited. The family separation crisis is central to the work we do at RAICES. In 2021, we represented 52 plus families separated between 13 to 230 days. This July, our legal team filed a family separation lawsuit against the federal government in Arizona on behalf of 4 families. Our special guest today is Efrén C. Olivares, the Deputy Legal Director of the Immigrant Justice Project at the Southern Poverty Law Center. He's also the author of My Boy Will Die of Sorrow, a memoir of immigration from the front lines. This book is his personal perspective as a human rights lawyer, intertwined with his own story of immigrating to the United States at the age of 13. His writings on immigration policy have been published by the New York Times, USA Today, and Newsweek. Efrén has also testified before Congress and at briefings on Capitol Hill about immigration and border policies. We are very appreciative of him joining us this evening. He will be joined by Javier Hidalgo, who is Director of RAICES Pre-Removal Services Unit. This unit is on the front lines providing pro bono legal services and release efforts under a universal representation model to families and individuals in ICE detention. Javier is a former litigator in New York, where he practiced consumer protection, civil rights, and administrative law. And today's panel discussion will be moderated by Faisal Al-Jabouri, who is RAICE's Vice President of Development. It's been my pleasure to welcome you here, and now I'll hand it over to Faisal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dolores. Thank you, Efrén, and thank you, Javier, for joining us. Thank you for everyone who is tuning in this evening to spend time with us in conversation and to learn more about our work at RAICES, a nonprofit organization headquartered in Texas, but with national impact, and to engage in a conversation about family separation and how it has been embedded into immigration policy here in the US, and not just in the summer of 2018. First off, Efrén, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to just sort of get a sense from you right now. What are you seeing on the ground in your work today?
Thank you, Faisal and Dolores, for the introduction, and thank you to RAICES for the invitation. It is my pleasure to be here today for this conversation, and thank you to everyone who's tuning in for the conversation. Yeah, as you rightly mentioned, Faisal, the family separation is not something exclusive of 2018. It's something that had happened many times before in the history of this country. And in 2018, it reached new heights, and we had cell phones and Twitter to share the information much more rapidly than before. But it's nothing new. It's something that has been, by design, embedded into many immigration laws and policies throughout the history of this country. In terms of what is happening today, we see other modalities of family separation, right? Through Title 42 expulsions, for example, when, families who are not exempted, and are expelled, the immigration detention system that routinely separates families by, in many cases, detaining and then removing immigrants while their U.S. citizen children remain in the United States, for example. So we continue to see that. Right at the Southern Poverty Law Center, we focus our immigrant detention work in Georgia and Florida, and the conditions continue to be atrocious, right? The reliance on immigrant detention, on caging immigrants and asylum seekers, basically only for their immigration status, continues to be a wasteful, cruel, and inhumane policy that we fight against, both by representing individuals in facilities, as I said, in Georgia and Louisiana, as well as litigating and advocating for the end of immigrant detention, not only in the Deep South, but in the entire United States.
Thank you for that. And, I think what you touched on right now is just how, cruelty is the point. And I think that echoes a lot of what Dolores also, shared in her introduction. And I think that also speaks to why sort of legal services, first and foremost, are informing our work at RAICES and at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and how we can use that the data that we collect, the qualitative, the quantitative data that we collect in our legal work to inform larger sort of systemic change advocacy. And a lot of people don't realize that there is no right to due process. There is no right to legal representation in immigration court, even for tender age children. And it's actually why I'd love to bring in Javier. Javier, why sort of specifically, do you think that legal services are sort of this core sort of need in our fight for migrant justice today?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think, and you're just hitting on it, on the collection of data, right, to inform some of the larger advocacy efforts, right? It's one thing to to kind of really trumpet a lot of the problems that we all know are going on, right? And everyone, and the anecdotal kind of sense that like everyone has seen and everyone that's doing this work has seen a lot of the same, but it's way more powerful to be able to say, to be able to break it down into data and say like 80% of our clients, 60% of our clients, whatever the data says, but to be able to actually use that work and leverage the data that we're able to pull out of that work to really give to really leverage it and give that extra strength to when we're advocating to people who have that power to make those changes, right? Obviously, we're not going to be able to make that change within the system, but be able to really tell that story through data about how broken this system is and how wrong this system is. I think there's a lot of value in that.
Thank you. And can you share a little bit more about what drew you to this work, Javier? Because I believe you joined us in 2018, and that is the moment in time when I think as a nation, many of us started to pay attention to immigration in the U.S. and the systemic injustices. But what drew you specifically to this work?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, like you mentioned, prior to 2018, prior to December 2018, when I joined RAICES, I had not worked in immigration law. I was working in civil litigation, civil rights litigation, consumer protection litigation, and administrative law, and really didn't know too much about immigration law. However, as a parent of brown children, right, and seeing what everyone was seeing on the news, that, seeing brown children separated from their families, right, it was hard not to identify with that and really see what was happening as a direct threat to my own kids, right, and my own family, right. Seeing that it was so easy to do away with any rights of children that look like my children, right? That felt so close to home. And what am I doing as a parent to make sure that that's not the world that my children are going to grow up into, right? So that kind of, on a personal level, that was what called me to want to work in this field and want to be able to support this work. At the same time, I was living in New York at the time. We knew we were coming down to San Antonio. We were actually moving down to San Antonio following my wife's work, and I knew I wanted to support RAICES in their work, be it through volunteering or working with RAICES. And just so happened, shortly after moving down to Texas, an opportunity was available, and so kind of a confluence of circumstances had me show up into this work, and I ended up working with the very families that had been reunited after having been separated by zero tolerance policy, and I can't imagine any work that would be more rewarding than having been able to work with these families.
Can you tell me a little bit more about, what was the tone, what was the tenor when you were working in the detention facilities, seeing these families reunited? You, of course, honor to be able to be a part of any of the healing work, I can understand, but what were you coming away with in that moment?
So I can answer that. It's kind of from different perspectives, right? One, as an attorney, kind of having my eyes open to what the world of immigration practice was, right? There was a lot of shock, right? How could this even be? I don't want to make any illusions that our legal system is perfect, right? It's far from it. But there's a level of accountability I was coming from that was completely absent from the immigration, like the immigration practice that I came into, right? And seeing that these families that were just put through this horrific circumstances are now facing such a just wholly unjust legal procedure, legal process, right? Where there was no accountability and it was rife with misconduct from the so-called adjudicators, was shocking, right? On a personal level, like you said, in addition to being honored to work with those families and being able to bear witness to what they were going through. It's hard work, right? To witness it, because you're seeing, especially with fathers and children, you're seeing in real time the deterioration of people's souls, the breaking of people's souls, right? I got there shortly after a lot of the families got there, and there was still families showing up and coming to the detention center we're working at with their kids, and you see the hope quickly fade away from the fathers, and you see such a heart-wrenching change in the children, right, as they're stuck now in detention, having gone through that horrific separation, then reunited, and then maybe some sense of hope that maybe they're going to see freedom and get to the family that they were trying to get to in the United States, and now they're stuck in detention, which is what happened, right? All those families were reunited and then stuck in detention for a very long period of time. Many gave up on their cases and wanted to be deported and didn't even want to fight the case anymore. And even that they couldn't necessarily do, right? So they were just stuck in detention. And particularly the day that I started was the day after you mentioned, Dolores had mentioned the lawsuit that RAICES brought on behalf of fathers that had been reseparated. That was the day that was the day prior to I started. I came the day that those families were actively had been reseparated by ICE and the contractor, and to see that play out was impactful, and I think just framed my passion for continuing to do this work.
Thank you, Javier. Yeah, I think just for a little bit of context for the viewers, is that there was family separation where parents and children were torn apart from each other for up to 230 days from what we have seen with our clients, and that there was a practice in detention facilities, including at Carnes Family Residential Center, which is a prison, where reseparation happened. And sort of, again, to underscore cruelty was the point. It is the mind games to subjugate and to sort of maintain power. And so, Efrén, I would love for you to share your vantage point. You come to it from a different sort of perspective, timing wise. You were working in the field. I believe you started to see sort of the signals of family separation happening, but not necessarily sort of have anyone sort of officially state that was the case in news headlines or from the federal government. So what were you seeing? When were you starting to see it? What started to bubble up as an immigration attorney?
At the time, I was at the Texas Civil Rights Project. I was the only attorney in our South Texas office. It was a paralegal and me and our outreach coordinator person, a tiny office working on a variety of issues, including immigrants' rights and border-related issues. And in May of 2018, before the family separations had made headlines or had been covered in any degree at the national level or even international later, I was contacted by a federal public defender in McAllen, right on the border, who had been there for many years, and she would represent immigrants who had crossed the border and were charged with illegal entry. This law that has been in the books at that point since 1929, right? Almost 80 years. In 2018, and rarely invoked. It's a minor offense. It's a misdemeanor to cross the border between ports of entry, right? Carries the same penalty as running a stop sign at the Pentagon, and prosecutors typically exercise their discretion, right? They would not charge everyone. And with the new zero tolerance policy, which had been announced a couple of weeks before in San Diego at a press conference, where the then Attorney General made it very explicit that the intent of this policy was to deter other immigrants from coming, right? If you don't want your child separated from you, do not come, or almost verbatim his words. So what was starting to happen in McAllen is that immigrants who were being charged with this misdemeanor, when they showed up to court, they were telling the public defenders that they had been traveling with a child, with a son or a daughter, and hadn't seen that child in a couple of days and hadn't been told anything, where the children had been sent, when they might see them again, who was caring for them, anything. So the public defender calls me and asking if we could do something about it. So my first reaction is, can you write an affidavit for us? Can you do an affidavit, and then we'll take that and figure out the legal strategy? I didn't know if it was going to be a TRO or something within the criminal case or something, but we needed the factual basis, the evidence to do any legal action, right? She said she couldn't do that because these were her clients. So the attorney-client privilege prevented her from doing that. But she offered if we wanted to come to court in the morning before the criminal hearing started, and for a few brief minutes, interview the parents directly. So the very next morning, Georgina, our paralegal, and I showed up to court at 7:30 in the morning to the Benson Tower in McAllen, in downtown McAllen, to see if any parents had been separated from their children. And 5 parents had been separated that morning, and we started interviewing them, capturing their names, date of birth, country of origin of the parent and of the child, to document that they had been traveling together. Because as you were flagging earlier, the government was not keeping track of that. So we needed to document that they had been traveling together. And then hear a little bit about what had happened, right? Who took your child? Was it an agent wearing a green uniform, which would have been Border Patrol, or a blue uniform, which would have been ICE? What did they say? Did they say how long they're going to be separated from you, where they're going to be sent? And it became clear from day one that the immigrants had been the parents had been led to believe that the children would be at the Border Patrol station waiting for them that afternoon. So the parents would tell us, like, yeah, I saw my son last night, and I'll see him again this afternoon at the Border Patrol station. So then it fell on me and Georgina and I that first day to break it to the parents that, in fact, we didn't think the children were going to be there. And the reason for that was this legal fiction that the government created, because at the moment the parents were sent over to court for the criminal hearing, they were under the custody of DOJ, while the children were in Border Patrol custody, which is DHS. And now, being under the custody of two different departments, the children were deemed unaccompanied, even though they had been traveling with a parent. So I would explain to the parents that I hope your child is back at the Border Patrol station, but there's a chance he's not going to be there, that he may be at a shelter. And even at that point, they would hardly flinch. But then they would ask when they would see them again. If not this afternoon, when? And the reality was that we had no idea, because at that point, we had no idea whether they would ever see them again. There was no plan at all to bring them back together. And our greatest fear was that parents would be deported, which in fact happened, and the children stay in the US. Forever lost, if you can find a parent, or the child in foster care. That was the greatest fear at the time. And in trying to, explain that to the parents, it was extremely difficult, unlike any other conversation I've ever had in my life, because on the one hand, I didn't want to lie to the parents. I wanted to be truthful. And at the same time, I didn't have the words or the heart to break it to them that I really did not know if they were ever going to see their child again. Think about how you say that to a parent. I still get goosebumps because zero training, we were way under, I forgot the expression, above our head, or under our head, to try to explain that to the parents, and we had to figure it out on the go. Luckily, the parents that we interviewed that first day, we were able to represent them in a human rights complaint, and happy to talk more about that. But that's how TCRP and myself got involved in that work, and McAllen ended up being the epicenter of the family separation crisis.
And did you ever anticipate in that moment, right, when you started to, when you went to the court that first morning to talk to those five parents, that the scale of this would in fact be sort of 1,000 times that at minimum?
I could not. When I had that phone conversation the day before with Azalea Aleman Bendix, the public defender, I couldn't believe it. I was like, this can't be. Something's got to be off. It cannot be that in 2018, in the United States of America, children are being taken from their parents without any documentation, any process whatsoever, any explanation. Something is wrong. This story cannot be happening, right? But showing up to court and hearing it directly from the parents was doubly shocking, right? To hear it directly from their voices that it was happening. And I could never have imagined that it would be the scale that it ended up being, as far as we know. Keep in mind, the documentation and the record keeping was so poor from the government that we think it was 5,000, but there are almost 19 courthouses. There are 19 courthouses along the border, and there was nobody in other courthouses interviewing parents. We will never know how many were truly separated under that policy that summer because of how poor the record keeping was. This was cruelty doubled or coupled by incompetence that resulted in such atrocities.
There are so many additional questions I could ask, but I think you couldn't believe that in 2018 this was happening, right? That there had to be some type of mistake. And yet you're also a student of history, as we've seen from your new memoir that we are also celebrating. My Boy Will Die of Sorrow. It is in bookstores now. And you are also currently practicing law and was talking about Title 42 and what we are currently seeing today, right? So tell us why it wasn't really looking back in retrospect, why it may have been shocking but not surprising based upon sort of the history of immigration policy and what immigration policy is today in the U.S.
It was not uncommon to hear in 2018, this is not who we are as a country. This is unprecedented. We are a nation of immigrants. We've never done this before. This cannot be the United States. So in writing the book, I started looking into that and looking at the history of immigration laws and policies to see, was 2018 an anomaly, or was it simply that now we live in the world of instant communication and it was easier to share that information? And it was, again, surprising to see how common family separations have been in the history of immigration laws and policy in the US. For the first 150 years or so of this country, there was no federal law limiting who could come to this country. Naturalization was exclusively reserved to free white men. And of course, with slavery, Black Americans who were not immigrants in the conventional sense, their ancestors were brought here against their will, but family separation was commonplace in the slave plantations. And the abuse that happened in that context was truly the predecessor of the family separation policy. In the 1880s, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which to this day is the first and only law that has kind of excluded a nationality explicitly or an ethnicity in its title. And that started exclusion of Chinese immigrants, and it had a disparate impact on women, because some men could get exceptions, but the women could not. And that led to separation of husbands and wives who couldn't migrate together. In the early 1900s, with the influx of Irish and Italian refugees and Jewish refugees, many of whom were not considered white at the time, the backlash from all of that resulted in the National Origins Act of 1924, where Congress set quotas by country of how many immigrants could come into this country. And over 85% of the quotas were reserved to Northern European countries, predominantly white countries. That same year, 1924, was when the Border Patrol was founded to enforce those quotas. And shortly thereafter, in 1929, was when illegal entry, when the statute was first passed, and crossing the border was made a crime for the very first time. During World War II, Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants, citizens and immigrants alike, were sent to internment camps in this country, resulting in family separation, parents being sent to one, children being sent to another, without any regard to family unity whatsoever. And I share all of those examples to show that this was not the first time that this was happening, that immigrants who are not perceived to be white have been treated this way time and again. And I say who are not perceived to be white because who counts as white has changed over the years. And also not to chastise the history of this country or criticize it just for the sake of criticizing. I think it's important not to romanticize or sanitize our history, to know it and understand it for what it is, so that those of us who believe in human rights can continue to fight to make this country closer to that promise of being a beacon of hope and opportunity for immigrants from all over the country. Immigrants who came in the past, the founders of this country, those who came on the Mayflower, are pioneers and, fearless settlers. And yet those who come today are seen as looking for a handout. And the only difference is the color of the skin, if you look at it, right? It's people who have moved across the earth looking for safety or opportunity, which human beings have been doing for thousands of years. And in our country, we have not always lived up to that promise, that the promise of our Constitution of justice and freedom and equality under the law. But I continue to believe that we will get there, and I work to do my part to do so.
And I think, that's a really great sort of point to make, is that for all of us working in the space, in the landscape for migrant justice, it's because we do want this nation to reach its sort of ideal, right? We just don't think it's been there yet, but we have our own brand of patriotism, and we want to be able to fulfill the promise of this nation. And I think we see the worst of humanity in this work, but we also see the best of humanity. And I would love if you could share with us, are there any stories of hope, right? There's darkness, but is there hope?
I am an eternal optimist. There's always hope. Hope keeps me going. And the most inspiring hope is the one I see in my clients, from 2018 and from today. There's one particular story in the book that I shared that it got me the first day when I heard it, and it still gets me today. This father from Honduras who was traveling with his 7-year-old daughter. And unlike most parents who were misled, lied to, misrepresented about the separation. For example, parents would be told that they were taking their child to the shower or to the bathroom and then not return them. But this one father was told that later that night, they were going to take his daughter from him, that they had to take her. And what he did when he found that out is he told his daughter that later that night, a man was going to come to take her to summer camp. She had always wanted to go to summer camp all her life. So when the agent came and took her, she left with him very excited, with a smile on her face. I'm amazed beyond words can explain at how this father found it in himself, found it in his being to create this story in a short few minutes, right? To create this reality for her so that she wouldn't suffer in the moment of the separation. After having traveled from Honduras for who knows how long, through Mexico, hitchhiking and who knows how, sleep deprived, tired, in a cold cell, knowing himself that he was going to be separated from her, and still found it in himself to create this story to protect his daughter. I'm amazed by that. And that is the type of resiliency and humanity that I see in my clients that gives me hope to keep going, to try to find those same fibers in my being to keep doing this work.
Thank you. Javier, similarly, what keeps you going? Efrén just gave us some of the heaviness of the space, right? But what keeps you after 4 years now, having arrived, right amidst the trauma of family separation? What is the hope that you see in the space?
What is the hope I see in the space? I like to think about, well, the way I think about it is this, right? It's very easy in this work to get lost in the numbers, right? Whenever anyone comes into this work that's new to this work, I always warn them, like, this is heavy and you're going to feel like you lose a lot, right? And it's very easy to get lost in all the numbers that represent all the ways that this system beats people down and all the ways that all the problems in the system, right? But when you step back and look at the individual cases and individual lives that you touch, every time that we actually see success in a case, that's someone's life that you have changed, that we have changed for the positive, right? Every time that we prevent someone from being deported because we've advocated for them in the immigration court and have successfully changed the outcome or had the outcome be positive, right? Every time that we work with someone and help them get out of detention and see freedom and see an opportunity to proceed with their legal case, not detained and with their family and have somewhat of a fairish chance. Someone a long time ago, and when I was a baby attorney, pointed out to me, like, if you're in a certain type of practice, right, every case starts blending. You start thinking of every case is very similar, and every case is the same case, right? But for each of your clients, that's the most important case, right? So in each of our clients here, like that's the most important thing that's going on in their lives. And every time that we work with a client, we have the honor of helping them with the most important thing in their lives. And this is really life or death, right? Like they're fleeing. Our clients are fleeing they're fleeing death. They're fleeing the most horrible things that are imaginable, and we're helping them along that way. And so in that, I see, I see hope. So A, B, I always think about, when I think about zero tolerance and kind of this point in history, I always think about how easy it actually was for our prior administration to put that into place, right? It wasn't a difficult thing for them to make that policy go into place. There wasn't a lot of resistance, and that's because of, as Efrén pointed out, the history of our immigration system and what's been in place up until then made it so that it was already easy to push it to that next level. What also gives me hope is that there are a lot more people in our country now that know a lot more about our immigration system, and are continuing to learn about the things that need to be addressed, because of folks like Efrén that are telling these stories and getting that out there. And that also gives me hope, because the change isn't going to come from any one of us doing this work and grinding away every day, but change might be able to come by the collective, right? Information getting out there and changing changing what our community knows, our larger community knows about this, and really the pressure that they put on whatever administration has the power to make the changes, right? So, that also gives me hope.
We often say at RAICES the law is downstream from culture, and it's it's about engaging our publics in demanding the type of change that we want to see in our societies. And I think with Efrén, I would just love to know a little bit more. Javier just shared how you sharing your story gives him hope. And I would love to hear from you of what prompted you to write this latest memoir. Again, My Boy Will Die of Sorrow.
In the summer of 2018, it never crossed my mind that I would turn some of those stories into a book. There were some cases that I did think this has to be documented somehow, because the cases were so egregious, the cruelty so much, that I wished to be able to document it somehow. But it was not until many months later, until the following year, 2019, when talking to first-generation college students about my own experience as a first-generation college student, first-generation immigrant coming to the U.S. at the age of 13, that I started seeing connections and parallels. When I was born and grew up in Mexico, and when I was 9 years old, my father moved to Texas in search of work. He couldn't find work in Mexico, and he moved, and my mother, my siblings, and I stayed behind. And for the next 4 years, he was in Texas while we were in Mexico, and he would visit us occasionally, a weekend a month or whenever he could, every few weeks. And at the time, when you're 9, 10 years old, that doesn't seem particularly hard to your child's mind. It is what it is, it's your situation. My friend's parents would go to work and come back in the evening. My dad went to work and came back 3 weeks later. Didn't think much of it. But it was many years later that I have come to realize and appreciate what that experience, and not having my father around at the dinner table, not having him around for when a medical emergency comes up. My brother had to be rushed to the emergency room one time. Not having him around for significant school milestones. What that did to my identity as an immigrant, to my family as an immigrant family, and how common the separation experience is in the immigrants, for immigrants. By definition, when you migrate, you are separating yourself from something, your home, your community, your country, and often you're also separated from someone. It's not always a parent or a child, but there's almost always a loved one that you leave behind, or that you're going to try to reunite or bring later. I've had numerous people approach me after the book came out to share their own personal story, that they didn't think of it as a family separation before, but in fact, what was supposed to be a 2-week trip ended up becoming a 2-year separation from their mother. And it's extremely common in the immigrant experience to have some form of family separation. So when I started seeing those commonalities, I thought that there was value in sharing these stories, that maybe sharing the humanity behind it and hopefully the universality of some aspects of the immigrant experience could be a compelling way to share the stories. And as I said at the beginning, to share the stories of the families in particular, right? By no means do I mean to compare my own experience with that of my clients. In many ways, our separation was 4 years long and occasional, and we would see my father, whereas our clients' experience, RAICES' clients and TCRP's clients, it was violent and intense and torturous. But there was some commonality, and I thought some value in sharing those stories from that intimate perspective, right? Things that hadn't been shared in the news, that other sides, details, nuances, and the human impact, right? The human perspective of this policy. It's very common, as Javier was alluding earlier, to just get lost in the policy discourse, this immigration policy or that immigration policy, Title 42 or MPP, and we lose sight that we're talking about human beings here, somebody's mother, somebody's child, right? And trying to bring that back into the conversation was one of the reasons why I decided to write this book.
And what has the response been?
It's been excellent. One point that keeps coming up, and I have been pleased that it's a theme that has been taken away by readers of the book, is the issue of empathy and compassion. A lot of you probably remember, and the viewers perhaps as well, an audio that leaked in the summer of 2018. For weeks at TCRP, we had been hoping that somebody would leak a photograph or a video or something to show what the situation was really like inside the facilities. And what ultimately leaked was an audio. It's an 8-minute audio of children crying inside one of the detention centers there in McAllen. It's extremely painful to listen to. It's mostly little girls crying nonstop for 8 minutes, begging, pleading for a phone call, calling for mommy or papi to come and get them. It's very difficult to watch, to listen to. That audio was released or leaked on a Monday night, and by Wednesday afternoon, less than 48 hours later, the president had signed an executive order purporting to end the separations. And that audio was a turning point when it came to public opinion, because before that, we would still hear people saying, well, it was the parents' fault. They brought the children illegally. They shouldn't have done that. It was on them, not the government. We had people make those arguments still. But when they heard that audio, even those people turned against the policy. And the reason I'm convinced that the reason that audio was so powerful in changing public opinion and was more powerful and effective than a photograph or a video would have been, is because when you hear those voices, when you hear those little children cry, you don't see the color of their skin. And all children cry the same. And when you hear those cries, you think of your own children. Or if you don't have children, of yourself when you were a child. We were all children. And it was so effective at getting people to feel empathy and compassion at last, because it was so much harder to other them. And it's made me wonder, and it's one of the themes that I try to write about in the book, is why is that, right? Why is it that certain arbitrary traits, such as skin color or place of birth, become so significant? Why do we give them such significance that it even prevents us from feeling empathy and compassion for fellow human beings? How have we become so acculturated to considering such arbitrary facts so significant? Language, other things. So that question of why can we feel and do we feel empathy and compassion for some human beings but not others is one of the themes that I hope readers can grapple with at an individual level. I know I do myself and ask myself that question often, right? Why is it that certain things matter too much when it comes to how you see your fellow human beings?
I think that sort of points to why, we talked about the importance of legal services in this space, but why it can't exist in a vacuum. And I am recalling that leaked recording right now, and how powerful that was in shifting public opinion towards justice. But I think to me, I'm also thinking about how I wish we didn't have to share children's, private trauma in order to shift public opinions towards justice, in order to remind people of their humanity. Javier, in addition to sort of these reminders of, of everyone's intrinsic humanity, what else is necessary in this fight, outside of legal services? What else is necessary in order for us to get us closer to that, to that ideal state that we've been talking about in this nation, for us to fulfill our potential, as a nation?
It's part of it, right, is continuing that conversation outside the space, right? Like you said, it's like, just like you said, these services and this fight can't exist with just legal services in a vacuum, right? Like, I think that does hit the nail on the head, because I know for us, right, we're always thinking about how does this connect to the bigger picture? How does what we're seeing in this work fit into what is the truth of the country that we're living in right now? What is the truth of the world, and that we're living in, and how is this reflective of that? And there needs to be that interplay back and forth. There needs to be that conversation with our national conscience, right? Is this really, when we're looking at how we treat people in this country of different, that look different or from different places, right? We're at a point in our national history, or I like to think that we are, where there's an opportunity, right? The racial justice movement and the immigrant justice movement. There's an opportunity to recognize that there's that they overlap, and largely they're the same fight, and they really speak to what do we want this country to be? What do we want? Who do we want to be as a country, right? And are we seeing these things and pushing them away and just telling ourselves we're one thing, or are we recognizing that these are symptomatic of larger issues that really can be addressed if we're recognizing what these things are really showing us about ourselves, right? The things that we're seeing in our immigration space are symptoms of, or are symptomatic of what we're allowing ourselves to do or be in regards to how we treat ourselves, or how we treat people in a country that don't look like the people in power, right? And we can either be okay with that, or we cannot, or we cannot be okay with that, and put the pressure on those in power to answer it back. Like the promise of our country is that those in power work for the people, right? The promise of this country is that the larger community can tell our leaders what we want them to do with regards to policy and what rights are protected and whose rights are protected and who gets equity and who doesn't. And we are at an opportunity. Efrén mentioned, if it wasn't for cell phones capturing these things, right? That's how many times have we seen that in the past few years, that if it wasn't for cell phones capturing something, we would be still decades back, right? In these collective movements. And so we have an opportunity to really recognize what these things mean about who we are and make decisions about what we're willing to accept of ourselves and where we want this country to go.
Thank you for that, Javier. Efrén, what if someone were to ask you right now what they could do? Just an everyday individual can't go into the courtroom to fight on behalf of immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, children. What would be the one thing that you would tell them that's the most important thing in order to advance sort of our shared fight for justice?
No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. No matter where you are in the US, you can do something. We're immigrants, we are everywhere. You will find us everywhere, and with different needs and different backgrounds. There's a wonderful website, immigrationadvocates.org, that has a link to volunteering opportunities to support immigrants. You go on their website, there's a map on their volunteer tab, and you find your state, your city, and ways to connect and volunteer. Obviously, it is just as important, as Javier was saying, to be informed. Whenever you see a headline that sounds too simplistic, it probably is. Look more into it. Don't go for the sound bites. And obviously, it's coming up here in a month. Register to vote if you're eligible to vote, and vote so that we can have representatives who stand up for humanity, for human rights, who can, govern with these important values that organizations like RAICES defend.
Thank you. I think it's that we can't be complacent, right? I think that is the message that I'm getting here this evening. That our voice matters, and that we can all show up in the ways that we can, and that telling our own individual stories and the stories and experiences that we come across can be a form of activism, and that we also have to hold on to that responsibility to learn, to educate, to probe, and to hold each other accountable. And I think, again, that sense of community really rings true, because no one organization, no one person can do it all, can reform the generations, centuries long injustices that we have paid witness to. But again, in that theme of family separation, why do we separate families? Why has that sort of existed throughout our history? It is because it is meant to destabilize. And the best antidote to that is to root ourselves in community, and to build coalition, and to sort of advance our shared human rights. I really do hope that everyone who is tuning in today gets My Boy Will Die of Sorrow, Efrén's new book. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. Thank you so much for sharing that with the world. Thank you for sharing your experience and your strength and your hope, Efrén and Javier, with us today. Really quite meaningful. And I think, again, if you want to learn more about RAICES, go to visit raicestexas.org, RAICES, texas.org, and learn how you can join our fight for migrant rights. And thank you for joining us Efrén, Javier, any parting words?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for hosting this event and for the work that you all do. At the Southern Poverty Law Center, we often collaborate with RAICES, and I look forward to seeing you in the field.
Looking forward to it. Javier, any final words?
Likewise, I think Efrén hit it on the head. Is there's no one org, there's no one team, there's no one person that's going to be able to do it all. One of the great things that I find rewarding about the immigration space is the collaboration between the different orgs that are fighting this fight and doing this work, and how effective that can be when that there is a collective, collaboration and unified movement. There's a lot more power in that, and that's, I am grateful to be in this space with folks like Efrén.
I'm grateful to be in this space with you both. And again, thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you to our CEO, Dolores, for welcoming everyone today and for setting the stage for this conversation. And I wish everyone a good night. Take good care.